Okay, so now we're ready to begin Chapter 2, where we will talk about things like variables, data types, and calculations. And I do have a program in this file, but before I begin with that one, I want to talk about data types. Data types in Python are pretty simple. There are others besides these three that we're going to discuss this week, but I mean, these are the big three: string, integer, and float. And you probably understand these intuitively. String data is string data. It's a string of characters contained in quotes. So here I have the greeting, welcome to Chapter 2. You see the quotes. That's clearly a string. And then we have the integer type for whole numbers, positive or negative, 0 as well. So here's an example of an integer. So when you don't have to explicitly define a variable's data type when you create that variable in Python. All you have to do is dream up a name for the variable, a good descriptive name for the variable, and then give it a value, and then Python looks at the value and decides the data type. So here, for example, I provided a string and Python said, oh, that's a string. Here I've provided a whole number and Python knows that that's an integer. So this is an integer variable, num students. And then I have a healthy temp, 98.6, and Python sees that I have provided a decimal value, and so it determines that as a float data type. So you don't really have to think about data types when you're creating your variables necessarily, but when you don't think about data types at all, you run into trouble, as you will see in this example here. So I'm going to delete these, and here's my program. One thing I've added here, this is a simple program. This would not be a class with me if we didn't have the body mass index example, which is my favorite because it's such a nice, simple formula. It's something that we all kind of know. Body mass index, it's like a measure of weight for height. So this is the US formula. Somebody's body mass index is that person's weight in pounds times 703. Divided by the height squared. So let's say we want to calculate a body mass index for a patient in a medical office or something, or maybe, somebody at a gym, and we'll ask for the user's height and weight. So, I have a note here at the top. You can make a, kind of a block comment. Like in, you saw when they have the data types up above, like an inline comment, you can do a pound sign in Python. But if you want like a snippet of text and you don't want to have to do a pound sign in front of every single line, you can do this block comment here, which is the obviously three single quotes, kind of bookending your text. So anyway, I put a note here. Remember our 1, 2, 3 approach. If you've taken a class with me before, this is what I like to kind of drill into your minds, is this 1, 2, 3 approach with problems like this, where you're asked to calculate something. Really, it's most often just getting the user input, asking the user for what you need, and then you're going to calculate, your program is going to calculate some sort of answer or result, in this case the BMI, and then the third and final thing to do is to display that answer so the user can see the result. So that's what we're doing here. So here's step 1. Where I am asking the user for the patient's name, and then I'm going to get the patient's height and the patient's weight. Look at the way I have this go. So we use the input function to get input from the keyboard. And the input function, you can just provide the prompt that you want for the user to see, how you're prompting the user. And look what I've done here. I've used the F string. So once I get the patient's name, I'm going to turn around and say, okay, enter so-and-so's height in inches. Like once I have the name, I'm using it right away for the next prompt, using that F string. That's really nice to just be able to embed that and have it more customized, okay? And then the same thing with the weight. So we're getting the name, and then we're saying, enter the height in inches and the weight in pounds. And then, so that's like kind of step 1 in our 1, 2, 3 approach. And, I should mention, in case it's not obvious, when the user is typing that data in, it's going into the variables. Name, height, and weight, I've called them. Notice those nice, simple, descriptive names. Okay, and then finally, we're just plugging those values into the formula. So I have yet another variable that's going to hold the BMI, the result, right? And then I'm plugging in my formula that I looked up online. It's, once again, the weight times 703, that's the numerator, divided by the height squared. Look at how nice and easy exponentiation is in Python. You just do 2 asterisks, okay? So that should get the BMI. And then finally, step 3 would be to display the BMI. And look at this, I'm using the F string again, the BMI for patient so-and-so, and then I'm plugging in the BMI that's been calculated. Okay, now here's the thing. It seems great, doesn't it? Let me run it. All right, so we have our patient, President Abraham Lincoln. Look at that. Look at that. We're using the patient's name right away. All right, so I actually looked this up. Abraham Lincoln was 76 inches tall. That's 6'4", and he weighed. So anyway, I'm getting values between 180 and 185. So let's say 185. Okay, enter. Look what happened. All right. Here's the thing. I said if you don't think about data types, at least some of the time, you're going to run into problems, and here's why. All right. When the user is inputting data, like the user is in these 3 lines of code, that data from the keyboard always comes into your program as string data. So even though we're thinking height and weight, in our minds we're thinking, oh, height, 76 inches, that's an integer. 185 pounds, that's another integer. I'm thinking those are integers. Python is thinking, oh, I've got strings. Python was seeing this. Okay, and this when I was entering those values. Okay, wait, this. You get what I mean? Okay, this is not the same as a 76 and 185 that I thought I was entering. These are strings, and here's the problem. You cannot do math with a string. And so the program bombed. It was a runtime error, runtime exception, we would call that. The program blew up, basically, and it blew up on this line because I was trying to do math with strings, okay? So what do we have to do? We have to be mindful of that data coming into our program, and we have to convert it as it's coming in, okay? We know it's coming in as a string. We have no choice. That's what the input function does. It brings data in as string data from the keyboard. But what I can do is wrap that into this conversion function, this int function, and just kind of, we call this, your book calls this chaining functions. I would call it nesting function calls, where, we're talking about the same thing. So you can just wrap that input in this int function to convert that to integer data as it's coming in. So let's try it again. Okay, I'll try to cut down on my typing a little bit. And let's see, we said 76 inches. 185 pounds. Okay, so Abraham Lincoln's BMI is 22.5, so on and so forth. We'll look at techniques to cut down that decimal, but you get the idea here. So again, got to be mindful of data types when you're going to be doing calculations especially.